All philosophy.
In the beginning was the Word. Um, so this is the final of Can Virtue Be Taught? And we're saying yes, or I'm saying yes, and I'm going to be appropriately opposed by every single one of my interlocutors. Joyfully and happily, we go forward. So we were just talking before this, and I kind of thought of a new proposal. I'm going to say that proposal for virtue and its teaching. And then I'm going to not so much do a synopsis like in the fifth episode, but a concluding gesture, the takeaway, the account, why I say yes, virtue can be taught. What I mean by that. It's a yes, dot, 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 and a but, of course, but I'm going to put that to the side and just go straight into the yes and see what comes from it. So, yeah, so I lost the original proposal. Yes, by means of an activity. Virtue can be taught by means of an activity. Um, and that's what we've kind of come to. So then the question could be, what kind of activity and how do you engender that activity? And then we can get our teeth into like pragmatic or practical things. We kind of arrived at or reinvented. It's not it's our invention. It's also out there and it's being studied and researched by others. But three, uh, namely John Viveki and Christopher Mastropietro, dialectic into dialogos. The three creative constraints that help engender dialogos, this living dialogue that happens between us, that we are taking to be the activity that can engender virtue teaching, virtue cultivation. So the creative constraints, we propose a virtue, you propose something about a virtue, okay? Then the classic Socratic process or elenchus is taking that proposition, the definition, and affirming it, but marking it for insufficiency. And then it just goes on continually, kind of. So that's this manner of tending, which is the second creative constraint, tending to what is proposed. There's a lot to expand on the nature of attending, and we emphasized appropriate opposition in that second creative constraint. But there's a lot more that goes to it, amplifying another's proposition, expanding, breaking down. Implied in all of those considerations is the direction. And this was a recurring question for us, like what is it that determines the appropriateness of the opposition, or what, when tending to another's proposition, what is it that like how am I making sense of the way in which I should attend to the proposition being made? What am I serving? What am I following? This was the proposition that I hinted at in the beginning, which is, I'm going to say, is the logos as that intelligibility that unfolds between us and through our participation in it. So we want to come into participation in it, and the appropriateness of opposition or being together is in the service of that unfolding intelligibility between us. This dislocates the problem of whether virtue is possessed or whether it's had, and it puts it more into that realm of participation and enactment. Then it becomes enacted. The third, the third creative constraint is the reflexive noticing of emergence in the process of dialogos. So this happened to us, that idea of appropriate opposition kind of emerged in our coming around the question is of can virtue be taught? And then we brought appropriate opposition up, and then we made a proposal. We could say, okay, virtue as appropriate opposition. And then we expanded and we explored it from different angles. And then that third process of reflexively noticing what emerges between us. This gives space for emergence. Um, yeah, what may be part of this, if you don't get too sucked into the material, is a reflective element of thinking about the process that we have followed, thinking about this difference between process and product. We here engaged in the process or the activity that we um, are pointing to, and then we left with a product, and then we share that product, and it can be listened to and engaged with others. So there's a processed product at the end of it. What I'm referring to now is the broader pragmatic context of the why we gather around the question of can virtue be taught, both for our own interest and lack of virtue, and because we are entertaining the questions of how do we bring philosophy into our wider context? How do we bring what we have seemed to benefit from to others? How do we teach virtue? And there's that's invokes another practical consideration, which would be thinking about the educational prerequisites for the kind of activity that we engage in. Those that have been that are important and maybe have been lacking is a sense of developmental theory, how to gauge the appropriateness of content or material that is shared and manner of engagement according to some sense of human development. And then the other brackets would just be maths, music, and gymnastic. And that's very Platonic. Yeah. So to conclude with the yes, can virtue be taught? Yes. The individual needs to be disposed or pursuing the unfolding intelligibility or through line of intelligibility, the logos, and it's in service to that unfolding intelligibility or obedience to that the individual is able to act increasingly virtuously with others by bringing them in service to that same unfolding intelligibility between them. In the character of Socrates, this comes out in all his maneuvers or performativity. He never exercises authority. If anything, he's always submitted to authority, but he's obedient to something that others then begin to track that reveals his authority through time. So this is what came out just before we started, was this submission obedience link. He submits to authority, but he's obedient to something that even when there's like antagonism, he carries and attracts and draws. And then that thing I'm proposing that might just be an empty is the logos. So yeah, that's my speech to begin. I will remain quiet for a fair while now. Yeah. Let's see where we go from here. Hadley wanted to oppose, and then yeah.
Yeah, so I take it to be that what you're proposing, let me just see if I can clarify for myself what you have proposed, because you went through a lot of stuff there and there's a lot of
Yeah,
rich about what you are trying to say. So I take it that what you're proposing is that virtue can be taught, and the way that it can be taught is through sort of training someone to have a disposition for dialogos, or what you call dialogos, that ability to dialogue and that ability to appropriately oppose others when they're supposed to. So it's that is I'm struggling to understand whether that ability to engage with dialogos is virtue, and then the training to be predisposed is the teaching of virtue, or if rather that the ability to engage in dialogue, that ability to tap into dialogos, to see those through lines, etc., is conducive to virtue or is a means to virtue, and that the teaching is a getting one to that medium or to the means. So whether, I'm not sure if my question's coming out distinctly, but rather whether you're proposing that dialoguing is itself virtuous, and that teaching dialogue or teaching the capacity for dialogue is teaching virtue, that strong identification, or is it rather that dialogue is conducive to virtue and is sort of a medium through which virtue is reached, which itself can be taught?
Yeah. So I know I said I'd shut up. Apologies, but Hadley, you just enacted the thing that I left out, um which is where we might go in the next series, which is the dialectical material. That another thing that affords the emergence of dialogos is the coming to engage with material that is dialectic, it, in some way opposed. So the the I think what you're just saying, the relationship is dialectical between the virtue being cultivated and then the virtue capacitating the following of the logos. So it's like because the virtue in the sense of excellence in terms of capacity to follow, and then the following itself as as a manner of virtuosity. I'm not being very
Yeah,
very
okay.
yeah.
I think I see where you're going. So it's a sort of, so the capacity for dialogus is a sort of potentiality, and that sort of potentiality becomes actualized through the activity of dialoguing that you're talking about. And that actualization is itself the virtue emerging or coming to fruition that is there in the seeds that are that
Mm.
predisposition.
Yeah, virtue is almost in the light of coming to better follow, because there's something like I want to like a more continuous or distributed understanding of this is what we inevitably do anyway. So it's just a refined example coming into dialogue and seeking like sense and intelligibility. Um,
Yeah, it's sort of it's got the reason why I chose the potentiality actuality distinction is because Aristotle's prime example where he uses that is ousia or being, and his prime example of a being is a life form, something like, I don't know, an elephant. Um, and that has its own sort of self-continuity to it. I'm not sure what the self-continuity of an elephant is, but it sort of has the in the sort of germinal seeds that lead to the birth of, I don't know, a baby elephant, it comes to actualize itself as an elephant by doing the thing that elephants do. So too in the acorn, it becomes an oak tree by having the sort of predisposition or this potentiality towards that. And then that process of becoming the oak tree is itself the actualization. So what you're sort of proposing seems to be something like that, in terms of virtuosity and seeking virtuosity as sort of the being of a rational creature or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if you want to put such strict labels on it, but what I'm trying to say in effect is that what we all do, whether we intend to or not, by nature, is seeking virtue. And why we do that is because it's our nature to either be virtuous or to seek virtuosity,
yeah,
something like that.
yeah. That there's that element of I think it comes in the beginning of the Protagoras that we all partake to some degree in virtue already. We all have virtue just by being. And then it's the so then the sophist is saying, I know that art that makes you more virtuous or that makes you a better citizen. So that like the whole understanding is already located in a relational context
So doesn't
of
that throw
virtuosity.
us back to virtue being God given and the learning of virtue really being a learning to nurture what you already have and to sustain what you already have?
Ah, how what would you say about like because it's in the polis then. It's in there seems to be like a different, like it's in our being with one another. And then is there a different how to like I guess like nature and then us social, like
How do you separate the nature from the social?
well so the God given or the innate.
Mhm. And then through the practice of us engaging with each other, we cultivate it by sustaining it.
Ah,
It's starting to sound like that we are born with it, but our attention can be veered away from it. But in engaging appropriately with each other, we direct our attention back to what we were already born with, to sustain and cultivate it further. Cultivate it further to sustain it. That makes sense. If anything, it seems like it's already there, and our work is to defend what's already there. We have to keep reminding ourselves that it's already there, and we need to defend it. That's what it's starting to sound like.
yeah. There's maybe there's a helpful maybe a frame that you help me think of now, like the that myth of Prometheus and Ephesus, or I'm probably not getting the name right, and that because we get like because we aren't given the capacities, we are then given, well, it's fire, but also the capacity, the political art, our ability to be together and function as a body is what's given to make up for our like soft skin and lack in other categories where other animals benefited. So then in that sense you um the political art seems to be like the major or most important thing. That's the thing of concern to cultivate, and virtue helps you be political. But then
So,
there's this
so
there's
it's
a
lovely, or we are
yeah
political to sustain virtue.
ah okay, so then there seems to be like a top down element too, in that the one who we point to as being virtuous is very disruptive to the political and to social being. Like he seems to subvert a lot of it, and he seems to be responding to and pursuing something that is not being held in like it's not under social coherence. Like he's obedient to something that
Mhm.
helps him to um the word not violate, but to subvert, invert, cut
The
through,
social, yeah.
ignore, not be under, something like that.
I don't know, because given the example of the people, it seems that they do it for the aim of not only securing the political element, but securing it in its best form. Seems that's what they're trying to say. Look, what we do, what we are prioritizing here isn't what's best for all of us. This is what we should prioritize because it's what's best for all of us, even if it contradicts the harmony of the moment. If what they perceive is whatever is keeping us for the moment will be harmful later, more harmful than it is beneficial to us now. Then
But
doing it in the best interest of the political element.
perhaps also, I mean, the question comes up about the subversion and the inversion that you're sort of talking about, this ability to cut through. Do they
Sorry,
cut
Andy,
through?
could you speak up? I
So
can't hear you.
the question of the Daniel raised this point about the ability of the person who has virtue to cut through or to subvert uh, sort of, I guess, popular ideas and sort of in service of something else. But the question is, do they subvert these ideas because ideas are supposed to be subverted, or do they find themselves subverting these ideas because the state in which they exist is not one conducive to or virtuous? So
Yeah.
is the person who subverts an idea, are you stating that the person that's good at subverting ideas is virtuous, or are you stating that there's a tendency for virtuous people to subvert ideas, and that is a consequence of the unjust or unvirtuous state in which they find themselves in?
I think it's something like because I was bringing out that difference of like of the political art and that virtue as being applicable to that, and then complicating that by saying that like our our exemplars of virtue seem to be responding or being obedient to something that is not being cohered to within the social body. There's like their obedience, they are obedient to something else that means that they sometimes transgress expectation or the direction of events or the way that we come together and socialize and talk with one another.
Now, is that
But
sorry,
yeah,
is that because it's in the nature of virtue not to be subservient to something else? Or is it because they're just not that type of person? So let's stay with that example. Do they not conform to social pressures because that's just who they are? Or is it something about the nature of virtue and the virtuous person to be
yeah.
undetermined by another? It
There's
seems
a
like the sort of self-determining character that you're trying to point to.
I think sorry, I'm feeling very jumpy. Sipo, what you were saying about the in the interest of the whole, I think gets at it. So it's not a disruptive it's not it's a disruptive, but it's not destructive
Mm.
intervention. So it's like it's that's just, it's so yeah, that's this element of the like Socrates submits to others in physical ways. Like so I'm just thinking of the beginning of it's everywhere in the drama of the dialogues. Like
Mm.
people hold him to
Yeah.
there, and then he engages them, and then the activity that he engages them draws that body to a different like in the Republic they like grab him, they come up from behind and they grab him, and then they literally say like we're gonna hold you here, we're gonna keep you here, and then that and then he's engaged with them, so he's submissive to them, and then those who engage with him are drawn. So that's this like it's like this it's this dual thing. It's a submission to authority, and then there's an obedience that affords him not being governed or the determined by the
Sure. I think I'm more asking about, and I see what you mean, that there's the sort of going down that has to happen. That's always in the dialogues. I think even in the Protagoras, at some point, someone holds his arm back. Um, but I think I'm trying to steer this conversation towards sort of categories of goodness for some reason. Or this conversation is steering me towards categories of goodness. And the sort of three distinctions that we usually come into is sort of good for another. So we have things that are useful or beneficial, like food. Food is good for another thing because it's not for its own self-sustenance, but it's to sustain another life form. So it's good for something else. Um, and then you can't have an infinite regress of things that are good for themselves because then there would be no goodness. And then we get the question of where they get their good from. And then there must be something good in itself, which, you know, we always come back to those weird circles. But in the case of virtuosity, it seems like it somehow is doing both jobs. It's good for its own sake and good for another. In the sense that Socrates or whoever the exemplars of virtue are people who can come down sort of from this higher level, from this pedestal, and in doing so, by being dragged down, have this beneficial effect where they sort of pull their interlocutor up into a state of sort of self-determination or goodness in itself, or whatever you want to call it. what's the point of this? That the the being of virtue is something undetermined by another or self-determining, and in being so has the ability to determine others in a sort of way that is itself not a
You have to
determinate.
run it again. You're gonna have to run that last part again.
It determines others to be self-determining, and in that way it turns
All right,
out
all right. I hear you. I hear you.
it's this weird thing where it determines itself, so it's not constrained by so virtuosity is not determined by sort of social constraints. We don't listen to the people who say that they know what good is, like Protagoras, who says that he has this art of virtue and can teach it to others because he shows that he doesn't actually possess this, and so he can't actually teach that. And so in if we had to listen to those people, virtue would be determined by something else, and then we'd be chasing the thing that virtue is determined by. We wouldn't be chasing virtue, because what we really want is that thing, the other, the outside, the thing that makes virtue good for having. But for virtue to be good for itself, for its own sake, it must have this weird self-reflexive character where it's undetermined by anything else. It's self-determined. And so our exemplars, not only does virtue have the peculiar character that it's free from outside determination, or it's got this sort of self-sufficiency, it also is peculiar in that it can bring other people or things into the same state. Um, it's not just beneficial for its own sake, but it also seems to be beneficial for the sake of others. It's not just good in itself, but good for everything that comes into contact with it.
Hmm. Yeah.
It seems, sorry, it
Aviles, yeah.
seems, at least from my perspective, that virtue might have a foot in truth,
Whatever.
right? A foot in
A foot in.
Okay.
truth,
Oh.
Yeah.
right? I'm going to try my best to explain this. There is something about virtue, as Hadley said. It has the ability to pull people into it as a state, right? We see that with Socrates. Socrates' ability to pull his interlocutors up into a sort of self-reflective, I don't want to call it self-reflective, a place where they question what they think they know to aporia in order to take up something else. Right? We've seen that move in Meno. There is something about the person of Socrates in his virtuousness, as we've put it, which he never disrupts. I'm trying to bring both you together. He never disrupts any system of what's going on. The life continues as usual. He brings people into an awareness, helps them turn themselves towards something, and then lets them go. I think virtue does the same thing. You turn your eyes towards it, but you need to see it in a very particular way. Hold on to that and let it go. I think my thoughts are disintegrating as I'm speaking. The main point here is, I think virtue has a foot in truth, because truth is the only thing that can turn someone and keep them turned. Do you get my point? Once you see that, okay, this is the system we live in and it's unjust, and there is seemingly something else which grounds all of our awareness, and it's somewhere out there. It's not in this thing, which is how I picked out that it's something out there, right? You start seeing that there's something else you need to investigate. You go after that, you start questioning what it is, and you start bringing other people over onto your side, and they slowly start seeing something is odd. Something is odd. Best example is Jesus just existed under a system. He came to preach about the kingdom within a system. He did not come to tear down the system. He's bringing people into another way of thinking. The kingdom is in the mind, it is in the heart, right? He's translating them into a different realm of truth to see things different. And from there to exercise their true selves, right? And maybe that changes things down here in the unjust system, right? But it's never to dismantle this. So I'm kind of back to what Sipho was saying. It's disruptive enough to question what is not for the common good over time. But it's to restore the true good. I hope I'm making sense. Restore the true good. So the virtuous person somehow seems able to see what is truly good, what is truly right, even if for a moment, bring other people over into that so that they turn themselves, but they never try to dismantle the system. Because if enough people turn themselves, I'm subjecting you to what I think truth is. It's you seeing it for yourself.
Well, with that, I'm thinking now. With that, if we go back to the three questions that were asked in the Meno, is it taught? Is it a matter of practice? Is it God given? It would seem if we accept the proposal we're making right now, it would seem that all three. And this is what the one thing I don't get, why Socrates always separates things that don't have to necessarily be separated. Well, in this case, it's Meno who separates things that aren't necessarily separated, because if we accept the propositions we just made, then the part that's God given, if it has a foot in truth, the part that's God given is the capacity to see the truth and live in the truth. The part that is taught is when the person turns you towards the truth. And then the part that is practice is when you live in the truth you see. So it would make all three of those questions, a yes. That makes sense. Yes, it's taught. Yes, it's God given. And yes, it's practice. It doesn't have to be yes and no to the others.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. It reminds me of the example that you were giving when we questioned whether it was innate or social. Daniel sort of brought up that distinction between the innate or social, but you didn't really understand. And in terms of sorry, am I not speaking loud enough?
That's
Okay, let me speak up. So it brings me back to that question that Daniel raised to you earlier on about whether virtue is innate or social. And by answering yes to all three, you've sort of answered his question by also again showing that the distinction that he's making is incorrect, that the innate and the social are somehow different from one another, or possibly rather that it's innate in us to be social creatures. Because what happens in the case of something innate or acquired is with the sort of capacity, we can take the example of muscles and exercising one's muscles. We all given the capacity, we all have some form of musculature, and that musculature can either be trained and honed and actualized, or it can be left to sort of, by not attending to it, it sort of wastes away. There's always some degree of it, but we can always have a greater share in it by exercising it. And so too, in the case of muscles, where you can go to a trainer or someone at a gym that can, show you how to properly exercise the muscles, you're getting trained through something, that you're getting trained for something that's God-given. There's a sort of capacity that God gave you in giving you muscles. And your training is the turning your attention towards the proper exercise of those muscles, the sort of exercises that would help those to grow and perform the functions that they're supposed to function as. And then you would get the practice, which is, I don't know, the gymnastics or the exercises that you do to build that muscle. So too, in the case of virtue, it can be all three because it's a capacity that's God-given. There might be trainers that can turn our attention towards the proper exercises that facilitate or help the growth of this sort of muscle in the analogy. And then the practice would be the sort of dialoguing or the sort of thing that we're doing now, which is a sort of means to cultivate virtue. It's a means to sort of grow and exercise that faculty or whatever, if you want to call it that.
That's yeah, that's one way. And another way I'd say is to the same three steps you just introduced, but I don't know how to phrase what I'm trying to say, so I'll just say it. But it's more in the sense that the last element, the practicing one, is far closer to Aristotle's suggestion in the ethics. That now that you've turned your attention to, now that your attention has been turned to the existence of virtue and that there's a virtuous way to live, you have to practice, you have to try and practice living virtuous. That makes sense. So it's slightly different from what you're saying, just slightly different.
Yeah, and I think it should be. I think that there should be a part where the analogy breaks down, because it is an analogy.
Mm-hmm.
The part where it breaks down has to do with what Avila was bringing up in the it's not a virtuous person like what we were exploring last week, like with a character or the being or the personhood of virtue itself. So it's not virtue isn't predicated of someone. It's this it's a it is someone, like it is a character, it is a being, it is being. And the it's the turning is toward that being, and then the following that being, the intelligibility, like what makes intelligible.
Sure. So
And
so
then yeah.
interrupt. So another way of phrasing that, just to clarify for myself, because I think in very modern terms would be something like saying that virtue isn't an attribute, it's a substance. And so it has its own sort of substantial being. And so whenever we predicate virtue, we're not saying that X is virtuous. We're saying that they in some way have a share of virtue or take in the being of virtue, or we should
Yeah.
be making that attribution in a sort of different way.
There's because on that very loose frame of like we all partake to a degree in virtue by the fact that we're together. So like some political art, and we all have an idea of what it means to be together rightly, and so we partaking in it. But that when we push that partaking language, then this is the because there seems to be a difference, and the words that I want to use for it is logos and virtue, and it's the thing that one wants to be orientated towards is logos, and responsive to is logos, and then that it's in service to that virtuosity develops as a kind of by the way.
All right, so you're saying that's the channel to virtue, the logos itself. You turn to the logos, you eventually end up being virtuous. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Your degree of virtue it capacitates you to following the logos to a degree, and then following the logos further helps you develop virtuosity.
All right.
Yeah, so
and the degree of virtue which you possess was it already innate in?
well, that's we slipping back into that like attributes kind of thing. It's always dialectical, and it's always enacted and between. So it's always in conversation, like my excellence affords. That's a ridiculous thing to say. I've been saying that the whole time. It was at the beginning of one of the Platonic dialogues. And someone was reflecting like how it comes about. Like two people kind of meet, and then they like start talking about their excellence. But sure. But yeah, it's like it's a reciprocal thing. But the thing, um, and this might kind of press the question of the substance that is being pursued or communed over, or like the so our next the kind of suggestion for the next direction we're going is the Parmenides, and that material is um dialectical, and that's what we come to feed on. So I'm wondering how, yeah.
I want to push this question of the innateness more, because what we're proposing with the innateness seems to be in direct conflict with what we're proposing with the being of virtue. So the innateness is an attribute. The muscles belong to me, or the capacity for vision belongs to something. It's not eyes don't exist without a thing of which they're eyes for. But so in that sense, what is innate is not a being or not an Usian. It has a sort of, it's not a being unto itself. Whereas what we're proposing with virtue is that it is a being, and somehow we are innately drawn toward it. Um, so
uh,
the is virtue innate in humans, or is an orientation towards virtue what's innate in humans?
That's the
uh,
crazy thing, because it seems the orientation towards virtue is a virtuous thing itself. Now, I don't know if it is virtue itself, but it seems if you're not orientated towards virtue, you lack virtue. And this is the thing. That's driving me insane about the virtue, because we seem to fall back to the question of, it seems you need virtue to get virtue. We seem to fall back to that every time.
But sure, perhaps the division is again not appropriate. But perhaps we're dividing what shouldn't be divisible. In making this distinction between the innateness of virtue and virtue not being attributable, it seems like the orientation towards virtue is itself virtuous. I can agree with that, and that there's something outside of that that's virtue, that is the thing that we're orientated towards. But perhaps part of the activity or part of the being of virtue is to to it has it has a potential within itself to produce a potential towards itself for other things. I'm not sure how to say that. It's that same issue that we were running up against when we were talking about Socrates and his ability to make people reflect on themselves such that they are, you know, undetermined by something else. Um, I'm not sure. I'm losing my phrasing as I'm slipping into incoherence as the moments go, but it seems like there's something about the being of virtue that it has this ability to make itself known, and that itself is a product of virtue, and by so being a product is itself virtuous.
The, the issue with the issue with this inquiry is that there is no virtue without, can I say, not there is no virtue, but there is no realization of virtue without seeing it in something or through something. That's the issue. So in us trying to answer things about virtue in itself, it always inevitably falls to us pointing to something that has virtue in it as a means of, and this is why I think we keep falling back to the problem of, like the point you're making, that virtue has a capacity to draw things or people into itself. But I can't be convinced, or rather, I'm having a hard time being convinced that the things we find virtue in aren't just virtue in another form. Like, I can't tell whether we're finding virtue in these things or that's virtue in another form. And we had virtue and we want virtue and we want to sustain virtue. And our learning virtues, the learning of the value and sustainment of virtue, which is in itself, which I'm having a hard time, the more we talk about it, I'm having a hard time distinguishing virtue from things, from other things as they are. Not other things in a corrupt form, but other things as they are. Because we seem to use it also for others. As we've been speaking this entire time, we were saying the virtuous person does this. The virtuous, this. And we were talking about the many, right? And every time it seems like we're saying the virtuous this, the virtuous thing. It sounded like we're saying when this is doing what it's meant to do, it does this. When this is doing what it's meant to do. So if it's doing what it's meant to do, then that's what it really is. When it's doing what it's not meant to do, then it's being less of what it is. And then I thought that's how we fell into truth. Because when you're truly the thing that you are, you're doing the things you want, you're supposed to do. So our thinking, our longing for virtue is not only a thing that we do, it's also a thing that we are. We're things that long for virtue, but we also things that have to be virtue. It's crazy because it seems like the wanting virtue is us being virtuous. So the us wanting it is us being the thing that we want, but we also want. So this is why I fall into sustainment a lot. That what if we're not wanting to get it? We're talking about a different type of wanting, not a go get, but a sustain through a continuous activity, a sustain through a continuous activity. And then when the activity is not appropriate, we are trying to sustain in the wrong way. So now we're messing up the thing, but we are still driven by the virtuous desire for virtue. It sounds weird.
I agree with you that it seems like a sort of property that everything possesses in the same way that everything that is has being. So all horses are horses and they exist and possess the capacity of existence, but to a higher or lower degree, depending on how good they are at being a horse. So I don't know. That's exemplified in, I don't know, whatever the good horse is, the racing horse or something like that is more a horse than, I don't know, the horse without legs or something like that. But it's difficult because what we're running up against and what we seem to be either running up against or running from is some form of Plato's theory of imitation. The example that you raised about seeing virtue in things, we don't ever get an example of actually seeing it. And you brought up this problem of perspective the other week. Do we actually see virtue, or do we think that we see virtue? Do we have this false perception of virtue? And it seems like from the dialogues, just basing it more on the text rather than from a lived experience, that we never actually see virtue itself. None of the characters that claim to have virtue actually possess it, and none of the people in the dialogues that claim to be virtuous turn out to be virtuous. They all seem to be like laying claim to this thing falsely. So then the question is, how do we come to see virtue at all if we don't see an example of it, right? There's nothing from which we get the idea of virtue, or it appears to be so from the argument that I've just given. But you also proposed a sort of solution to that. Where you said that we see it through something, or like through something, and so the theory of imitation here is useful because the example that he gives, I think in the Republic, is of seeing reflections in a lake or something like that. And how these reflections or the shadows on the wall, I can't remember which is the actual example, are like the reflection of virtue is like virtue in the sense that it's the reflection, but it's also unlike virtue. It sort of has this dual character to it. I can't remember how I phrased it, but in an essay that I did in fourth year, I tried to talk about how the reflection of a dog is not a dog, and having that sort of through line to see something also gives us the ability to see virtue. So if virtue is never actually exemplified and it's something that we only see through its pale reflection, we see its pale reflection in instances in real life, then what we approximate and what we come closer to by enacting this reflection that we see is not virtue itself. It's antithetical to what we've been approaching, but something that's virtue-like, or you know, a sort of human virtue. We're still not getting to the being that is virtue itself.
Uh, uh,
Yeah, I
the
think the example in the Republic was the difference between seeing light from the sun reflect or looking directly at the sun itself. It's like you're not really
Yes.
gonna see it as itself, but you're gonna see that the light you see that the light that comes from the sun is the thing by seeing the light reflect from other things around. But when you
Yeah,
look at the sun itself, it's a problem.
that's what we seem to be running up against, or at least for me, that's what I seem to be running up against. Whenever we get to virtue, we feel like we're looking at the sun. It's
Exactly. I'm on the same boat with you on that.
it's a sort of
Honestly,
blindness. We seem to see it reflected in everything, just so too as we see the light from the sun, which illuminates and sort of self-sustains everything else, to bring it back to what you were talking about earlier. So too we see virtue in things, or we see things reflecting virtue. And we even see it to the degree that there is a sort of just getting along together of sort of citizens in a sort of political state, which is a sort of imitation to some degree of what virtue itself would be, the sort of weird dialogical process that we're talking about. But we whenever we try to talk about the being of virtue itself, in this, we keep running up against this sort of indescribable thing. And I think,
blinded us. And then we
yeah,
can't see shit for a while. Blinded us, and we're like,
but I think
everything
Daniel,
in reflection.
in my head, I imagine Daniel wants to be against that.
yeah, of course. The appropriate opposition. So I think sometimes we're using their virtue where we might be better served using word like being, and then we can talk about okay, being and what is it constituted of. And now we're kind of looking towards Parmenides as being a non-being, and that dialectic. So then it's the relationship to being and its implied non-being that then cultivates a virtuous character. So like virtue is is participated in all of us to the degree that we're participating with one another. So it's one minor point, just like getting the like putting
I hear you.
yeah, we might be using the word virtue where we should be using more the word being.
Is that because
Explain why there's a problem with using virtue real quick.
I want to throw a spanner in the works before I want to explain? Is is that because is that because are we running these two, are we conflating virtue with being?
Yeah.
Because they shouldn't be conflated? Are you saying that virtue and being aren't the same thing? Because at several points in the previous videos and in this video, we've identified virtue with the true virtue with being as having the shared character that somehow everything has a perfection and is what it is in virtue of being, exemplifying the sort of perfection. And so the question is, aren't we sort of positing a unity of these things? And isn't that why we're running towards the question of being and non-being rather than because we're conflating something that shouldn't be conflated?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think my gesture is more like a toggle. It's like a like the something you said, Sipo, in the middle of what you first said was like doing what we meant to do. Then that might be a way to drive a question, because it would bring purpose into it. But saying that now, I'm not sure how that's, because where are we right now? Where where do we go? Where do we go from here? Like how do we?
What you
So
say,
we should not be disoriented. But okay, yeah. See, but yeah,
I'm saying with what you say, it's got me, like with everything that's been said, it's got me wondering if we should, or rather it is within our capacity as the things that we are to identify virtue, or are we the type of things, you see, now I'm left in the realm of assumption, are we the type of things that are what we are because we pursue virtue, and we
sorry.
pursue virtue because, I mean, we can't get to it because we're supposed to pursue it. If we get to
Okay,
it,
wait. There was something that you reminded me of something Hadley said. We were talking about reflection and imitation. Like, if we're saying, putting it in the context of virtue, in the context of political art, and virtuosity as some kind of citizenry or being together with others, a capacity to be related with others, the skill or the excellence in relatedness or relationality. If that's what we have when we relate with one another, we here relating to one another in our excellence or our lack of excellence, in our virtuosity, we are in a relatedness. If that relatedness is an imitation of something, then what is it? What is it an imitation of? And how far can we take this act of being face to face, communing in speech, to be imitative of or participating in reality, and in the being of reality, like in the like, to what degree is this participating? This, like, okay, I think I got somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know, Daniel. The how could we the prompt to ask the question, how could we fail to be related, comes up. In the same way, how could we fail to be virtuous, or how could we fail to exist? Insofar as we are, we find ourselves in the peculiar position that we have to relate to one another. Regardless, we exist in the context of other beings.
We can fail by interrupting. We can fail by interrupting, by being angry, by imposing, by saying that you guys must use this word for this thing. You must use it. It is the truth.
all right,
Okay, not the way that reality is. Sorry.
all right. So what you say, or what you say, you say, the thing is, now it sounds like you're saying there is a virtuous way for us to come together. It sounds like that's what you're saying. And then you're saying, look, there is a way for us to come together. Us just coming together doesn't mean we're doing it right. All right? But in Hadley's position's defense, like, us not doing it right isn't us really coming together. That's the other problem. Us not doing it right is us looking like we come together. And now this throws us back to our healer's position of truth. And perhaps it's the reason why Socrates looks more virtuous than everybody else. Everybody else says they are what they're not. Socrates says he is what he is. And because he seems to be tied to truth and everybody else isn't tied to truth, it seems now to fall back to the point of truth from Argile's point. I'm getting more and more convinced that the virtue of human beings, the virtue of human beings is not to possess virtue, but to seek it. And now I'm thinking back to the Timaeus. Remember when we did the Timaeus? When it was the Timaeus and the Meno, when the argument was brought up that the inquiry of the good is the highest good, but it was for two reasons, and we always remember the one. The one we always remember is because we can misidentify the good. We can misidentify the good, and that would be harmful to us, right? But the other thing I think I forgot, and I don't know if you guys have forgotten, that if you find the true good, there is no longer need to inquire into the good. It means it has harmed your capacity to inquire into the good. Now there's no more reason to be alive for you. Life is tied to the inquiry of the good.
Perhaps, Sipo, another way to phrase that might be more pertinent to the examination that we're undergoing is, so not that if you find the true good, it's harmful to the capacity for inquiring into the true good, but there's something about the nature of life the nature of life is becoming. It's not
Yeah.
It has this
It could
character
be.
of flux, and what we're saying about virtue is that it has a being, or either that it is being. I'm not sure whether we've settled on where we want to put it yet, but there's this sort of becoming character to us, which makes us the sort of things that can't be
Yet
virtue.
yeah.
Because we never fully are. We're in a state
We are
of
always becoming.
we can become virtuous, perhaps for a while, but we can't be virtuous. There's actually, man, I wish I read the Protagoras deeper. There's a whole section on the poem that they talk about. I think it's Simonides' poem towards the end of the text. And they talk about being virtuous is very hard. And then they make the distinction between being and becoming. And there's this part about becoming virtuous for a man is easy or something like that. I can't remember
Yeah,
what it was.
I think I remember it. It's the it comes out in the context of drawing out a contradiction in the poet. I think Protagoras brings it forward, and the first saying from the poet is it's hard to become good. I think that's the essence of it. Then later on in the poem, the contradiction is it's easy to be good. There's something like easy to be good. There's nothing easier than a good man being good.
Because you don't have to become. You just are. Is that the implication of the poem? You just are, because becoming is a process, and when you are something, you can't be anything. That's the thing about being, right? It can't be anything other than what it is. If it is, then it's a becoming.
It can't be anything other than what it is, and it by being what it is implies exactly what it isn't. Yeah. But
it's unchanging. That was one of the suggestions of the Timaeus, that whatever is being has to be unchanging. If it changes, it presupposes becoming.
I want to insert at this point in discussion the self-sameness from last week, that there is a self-sameness in Socrates, which is why we loosely applied virtue to him. Right? There's something about virtue that is staying the same. That ties in with what Sipo said. It's something we are drawn towards, right? In order to maintain part of it that we already have.
I mean, okay, wait. Like, maybe like just because okay, reflecting on our conversation, like the language of sustaining that you just used, we seem to come to a space where we then together, and it's like sustained, and then it drops. But just in reflecting in my own language, like my own imprecision, it's like, what have I actually said that like affords that sustenance? Like, like where's the? So then, I mean, I don't know if this is a harmful suggestion. Like, what? I'm just thinking of like, what is the? Okay, he has a the phrasing, dear locos, like loco, like loco. That
Yeah.
like if we just thought it came out of like this taxi driver. I was chilling with him, and we're waiting for something, we're waiting, and he was provoking conversation between people, and the thing that he brought up material that has like opposition or contradiction. He was like, what's the difference between proof and evidence? And it was like he was posing this question, and then baiting people, and some people would dismiss it. Some people would like take the question, give their answer, and then it'd be like, oh, but what about?
Mhm.
And then the person, oh yeah, no, I'm not. And then they get sucked in, and then we're going. But it's like it's it's almost nonsense. Like, well, there's a difference between proof and. But then I was trying to think like, what is he? Does he think he's understanding proof and if like his cause or goal in that whole situation was not to understand proof or evidence better? If that makes
Stir people up.
Yeah, I think just Daniel, to speak more about that, where we've come to in the past couple of minutes with the sort of being a virtue, being inaccessible, being on the level of existence, etc., etc., it seems like we're concluding against the very conclusion that you started with, that virtue is teachable, because if it's inaccessible, or if it's only through a medium that we access it, we never get to virtue itself, and without knowledge of this thing that is virtue, it's unteachable. And it's unteachable for a couple of reasons. We can't be virtuous according to the arguments we've made. We can only become virtuous, and even then for a little while, and all of these things. So to bring it back to your taxi driver and the Dia Locos question, is 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 the drive to teach virtue itself something unvirtuous? Like, why are we all so keen to teach virtue? What are we doing? What distinguishes us from your taxi driver? Just sort of provoking the people for fun.
The crazy part is, in the beginning of this, I was not convinced we can teach virtue. But now, like it seems Hadley is convinced now more than ever we can't. But for some reason, I'm convinced now more than ever that, shit, maybe we can teach virtue. It's just a matter of how we teaching it. It's just a matter of
that
how we teaching it and what we learn from it.
that question of uh is our desire to teach virtue virtuous? That thing's gonna take us home. We need to pursue that. We need to pursue that question.
Yeah. How do we distinguish whether virtue is teachable or not, Sipo? I guess we can put ourselves aside here for a second and just ask whether virtue is teachable or not. Is the desire to teach virtue itself virtuous?
That's true. That's true. That's true. When we have to, we'd really have to know things we don't know.
This this
We're trying to know right now. But
okay,
here's the
okay.
thing, though. I think it would be. I think it would be virtuous in the sense that if as it has been said that virtue is beneficial. Then,
if we
then
understand,
then we want to benefit others. Now the question we're asking is it
yes,
seems like you're asking, is it virtuous to want to benefit others? And I'm inclined to say yes, it is, if it's true benefit, because we want to provide true benefit for others. And what could be more virtuous than wanting to provide true benefit for others? Now, whether we can do it or should do it
yes.
is different from us
Provide
wanting to.
true benefit.
Come
Yeah,
again?
Say again?
Provide true benefit,
No,
or
wait,
get
wait,
them to become deeply interested in questioning what is truly beneficial, such as to
Yeah,
turn themselves towards true benefit, such as
benefit.
to want to teach in order to pursue.
It's another way. That is another way.
Okay. If we understand virtue, properly, it's like okay, then yes, but then we have to drive that question of properly. And we came to a really radical like proposition and idea. I think it was like 3 or 4. I'm not too sure where, but it was this realization that as long as I'm acting on the presumption that I can act for your benefit, I am not acting for your benefit. And we came to the reasoning because it has to do with, and this is my opposition to the opposition, is that it's the service to the thing that benefits one is that other orientation to the logos, to the thing that carries intelligibility. And it's by being drawn by and through that another can be drawn by and through that. And if not, then not. So if I'm desiring to give someone another thing, I've misunderstood the thing that I can give them by being after being.
No, we get entangled. We get entangled like that, Daniel. I don't know if I'm the only one who feels like we get entangled like that, because it seems like the same thing, but done differently. If I'm saying, okay, look, by trying to benefit Daniel, I am not benefiting Daniel. What would benefit Daniel is for me to focus on this. And I'm focusing on this to benefit Daniel. I'm doing the same thing with just more steps. I'm just doing more steps now. If even I'm looking at this thing, the question is, why am I looking at this thing? Right?
Okay.
You say, I'm looking at this thing not to benefit Daniel.
No, because it benefits you. It benefits you. It's your benefit.
Look at this thing, right?
Yeah.
And you say, you will be benefited by me benefiting myself from looking at this thing.
Only if you decide to look at the thing also.
All right.
That's where I appropriately oppose. Yeah.
Perhaps there's a third thing that we're leaving out of this line of benefit that we are identifying. So it's not beneficial if you try to give Sipo some benefit, right? You try to make him better. But it is beneficial if you are looking towards that thing that is beneficial. And you can draw Sipo in to look at that beneficial thing. And it's beneficial not only to you, but also to Sipo. And perhaps it's not the nature of you're looking towards your self-benefit, but perhaps the being of the thing is itself beneficial. Perhaps what I'm suggesting is that it is sort of beneficiality, or we're looking at the good in to say the word.
So it's the looking at that third thing. So going back to the looking at that third thing that benefits me, inevitably benefits him, but not because I am trying to benefit him.
Yeah.
Because I am focusing on that thing.
No.
Yes.
That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting the more radical conclusion. I'm suggesting it's not good because you're looking at it. You're looking at it is good because it is good.
Yes. Yeah.
And
yes.
Being good, you're looking at it as good, and you can draw others into looking at this good thing, which is good for them, not because they're looking at it, but because this thing is itself the good.
Yes. Right. Yes. Then
calling virtue the good.
Yes.
New element.
But then our question is, the drawing in, and then it's like techne.
Yeah.
So then we think about creative constraints, about creating the conditions for, and then we think about the material that we put before us. And those are the things that are within our direct effort we can do, and then otherwise
Lost it.
I want to say no drawing in, but that's just me. You can't
no
draw
drawing
another
in.
into the thing. You
Yeah,
cannot draw the other into the thing. We can talk about the thing, and the
I
thing
think,
will draw the person. You can't.
yeah.
I can't teach you
But
what
appropriate,
is
but
great
appropriate,
about Jane Austen.
but
I can tell you about Jane Austen, and I can be like, wow, Emma says this. Oh my gosh, when they do this, oh my gosh. And then that happens, cliffhanger. And then you're
no,
like,
but
oh, actually,
Yes.
I can't
it's
say, come,
appropriate.
let's read this. And then she says, do you understand?
So what's the opening statement for teaching us thing? That's a thing that can't be taught.
No,
By
but
you. Can't be taught by you. The teacher is the thing. It's
is the no thing.
itself. It is the being. You cannot
Right.
teach it, but teaching happens through you. Signpost. Just signpost.
What this does,
Pointing.
on another note, on a note related to what you're saying, but on another note, it reminds me of a claim made by Leo Strauss. Yeah, a claim made by Leo Strauss about how studying liberal education happened, and it relates well because it says it's the study of the greatest minds. And it's like, since no one is in agreement about the material in the greatest minds, and the greatest minds aren't in agreement about the very material they talk about, then you don't really have any teachers of it. You just have students, and the person who is teaching acts as a tutor because they've been a student longer. That's about it. So are we saying, in that respect, are we saying that we can never be teachers of virtues,
think-
we can only be older scholars of virtue? Is that what we've come to? That virtue can be learned but not be taught.
There's a resolution. Wait. We have to. So I want to defend the drawing in because I want to defend the appropriately opposing, and because that the thing that is of benefit must be between us. It's not a private good. It's not a private good. It has to be between us. So we have to appropriately oppose each other to derive benefit from it. But in our appropriate opposition, what confers the appropriateness is the good. But it has to. This is the requirement or the base condition of opposition or of being face to face. Because the thing that is benefit occurs between us as that which we are over. So it's not there. It's like it's between. So
Now, fuck,
No,
you're confusing me more now.
I think
One
you
more
want
time.
I think you want it to be betwixters, Daniel. I'm not sure it is betwixters.
This guy, bro.
I think the conclusion we all collectively the conclusion that's betwixt us that we collectively came to in the past argument
This guy's just minding us.
is virtue can be taught, but not by us. Whoever we choose to include in that group of things. It seems like what we mean by that is that virtue is something learnable, I guess, and virtue is somehow its own source of teaching. It sort of teaches itself, weirdly enough, but we or the things or anybody under it can't teach it. We have to be sort of, we can
We're in
teach a
Augustine,
predisposition,
yes. We have
and
landed with St. Augustine's teacher now. That's where we are.
the appropriate opposition is not the teaching of virtue, but the teaching of a predisposition towards virtue or something of the sort. It's a teaching about, not a teaching of.
Yes.
But so I predispose you by having what you propose. I tend to it, and then it's like this attendance to this what's being brought forward. And now I can do like a number of things with this. With what you propose, I can think that what would be good for you is for you to be over there doing that thing. So now I can like shape the proposal. I can be like, okay, like I see what you're saying, but it can kind of be, and then I'm trying to like impose a view. Like I'm trying to bring in here. But then there's a manner of being opposed and a manner of attending to proposition that doesn't bring you under the determination of something else, but brings you into the determination of the same thing that I'm being determined by. And that's what's conferring my appropriateness. But
Right, but
that's between us. That's
true. That's true, but it's so difficultly impossible because, like, how can I say it? There's got to be some level of certainty that the thing you're paying attention to is the right thing before you start pulling me into it. Otherwise, you're making me lost with you.
Exactly. That's why it can't be dependent on me and it can't be dependent on you.
But then it's betwixt us not because, sorry, Avida, to interrupt. It's betwixt us not because it's something in between me and you in the sense that it arises out of our interaction. It's betwixt us because it's something else that's pulling us both in.
Yes. And this is what we were saying.
No, it is.
Wait. If what we are doing is a reflection of that thing, is an imitation of it, then what we are doing is we are being opposed. We are in a relatedness. We're relating. So the thing itself is relatedness. It's a relation. So the being drawn in is not, it's drawn into something else. It's being drawn into relationship. It's like, and then the very fact of, or the enactment of relationship is the place, or is the thing, or the no thing, or the like.
Go speak or
I hear you. I'm sorry, Hadley. I hear you, Dan. Right. The between us relating is us gaining new insight into the thing. So to be appropriately opposed is me standing in the thing, pushing back against you, not quite in the thing, to get you to see the thing. So our relating is me pointing. That's all I'm doing. The thing is teaching by making me point because I know it enough to point. Right? That's our relation. But the thing itself, the being, is a complete unity. There's no need to relate. It's us in the body of Christ in heaven enjoying eternity. There's no need there's no giving in marriage. There's no taking in marriage. There's no need for opposing things. We are all one with one mind, with one will. We are all one. We are completely in sync. There's no need for me to try and draw you already in.
Yes. I don't know. I keep falling. The more we talk about this, I keep falling to the Timaeus and the attributes that belong to being, becoming, and non-being. Right? I believe the attribute that belong, the major attribute, or one of the major attributes that belong to being, is self-sameness, true self-sameness, which is unchanging, just unchanging. But the crazy thing is the imitative, the becoming, also has a self-sameness, except its self-sameness was unchanging change. It consistently changes in order to imitate the thing that doesn't change over time. If that makes sense. So I think the example we got in aesthetics was a drawing, right? That if I draw you from this side and that side and that side and that side, over time, I'm getting to get a full picture of you, but I can't get the full picture on you the one time. I need time to imitate. So it throws us back again. It throws us back again, it seems to me, to virtue being a thing we have to seek. Now, where we fall with the Christian scheme of things, this thing is, if virtue is a thing that we have to seek, if as human beings, our virtue is seeking virtue, right? Then perhaps I'm gonna use the word death or thing. Perhaps at the end of our lives, when we cease to be the things we are right now, human beings, right? Where now we don't have to worry about pursuing virtue. We can worry about just being virtue. But while we're here in the world of becoming, it seems our function is to just pursue virtue. We can't escape it. We can't escape it.
Abiya, the reason why I'm pushing that is because then people can say something like that. If you saying it's the sign and the so like it's not to seek, like it's the relatedness. So like the virtue arises out of the fact of relatedness.
How deep are you related with
the virtue is already there in part. And I want to say that it's a concomitance. There's a unit, there's a strange way in which we interrelate because we overlap.
Yeah.
We overlap. Remember when we were talking about how Christ befriends us, or how we befriend him, what that overlap might look like, particularly because we were in friendship. And I was giving the vulnerability and extending yourself out to the other. There's something between people just existing that makes us go like that. We overlap. There's something that overlaps, which is why our unity is in the way we harmonize. And our opposition, our proportional opposition, I forgot the term, the way we oppose each other correctly maintains that harmony. It doesn't produce discord, it maintains the harmony. There's something about that which sharpens our eyes so that we can see the thing that is drawing us all in. That's the book of Acts in the Bible.
It doesn't just seem to maintain our harmony. It seems like that appropriate opposition is harmony. It seems like the appropriate opposition is harmony itself.
Yeah, and I think why we've been so I want to be more sure of it, Avide. I think why we've been so appropriately opposed to Dan is because Dan is, I don't know if he's here still, but what I understand Dan is saying is that we, through this relationship, or the relationship coming to be, is one which interfaces or shows virtue. But I think what you're saying when you're saying there's an overlap, and what Sipo is saying when he just said what he said just now, is rather that overlap, that relationality is virtue, and that as a consequence of virtue we come into relationships. The relationship itself is not virtuous in terms of us seeing virtue, but rather virtue is a relationship and we come into it by sharing in virtue. And that appropriate opposition is that relationship. That appropriate opposition, Dan, I don't know if you caught any of that.
Yeah.
I don't know how, but rather it's not the relationship that is that shows virtue or that prefaces virtue. It's rather that virtue is the relationship, and the
Yeah.
relationality that we come into through these appropriate oppositions is itself virtue prefacing itself, virtue shining through,
Mm,
a
mm.
consequence of rather than a reason for.
And it's, yeah, yeah.
Bruh.
Sorry, Avina, you can
Hectic.
disagree with me.
Hectic. No, I'm trying to squeeze it together in my mind. I strongly want to disagree.
I see why. I see why. And I also see why Headley's point is the one I'm convinced of as well. But simultaneously, I'm also convinced of your point. And I think, I don't know, maybe I'm throwing a bomb in here, but I think the reason the brain keeps going back and forth again falls back to that one and many thing. Insofar we're saying the relationship is virtue, we could possibly just say again that look, the appropriate relationship that is harmony is yet again one manifestation of virtue. It's not virtue itself. Once again, seeing virtue through something instead of seeing virtue itself. That's why I'm like,
But
look, I understand both points because both points make perfect sense, even though they contradict each other. Somehow they make sense to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm misrepresenting you guys here. Feel
but
free to
Let's try and state clearly the points. Like there's okay. I'm gonna use the word being instead. Being is
all right.
relationship. Being is relationship. And then the other proposal. Okay, if being is relationship, then we are beings who are to be in relationship, and our virtuosity is our capacity for or manner of being in relationship.
I don't know if it's the words that are throwing me off. Can you please help me understand how being and relationship are the same thing?
Well, it's this okay number. We've touched it from like we've got a number of images of it from like different perspectives, but so we can go in different directions. Like the one direction we might go in the Parmenides when we talk about being and non-being. Like being is related to non-being. So if something like it's the relationship of the yeah.
is being related to non-being, or is non-being related to being? I think we would have to posit the other way around, because if we say that being is related to non-being, we're saying that non-being is something that is by itself. If that was the case, then non-being could be without being.
Oh,
And so non-being would itself be, and we'd be positing the absurd result that nothing is. Rather, I think we'd have to say something like nothing is in relation to being, or non-being is related to being.
Nothing. Okay. I don't know if we should get into the negatives. Although,
But there was a line, there was a through line here with Sipo's one and manyness to bring it back without clarifying the proposal at all. Apologies, watchers, if
yeah,
they are.
no, I didn't get it to do a good job of bringing it out.
You talked about the one and many, and last time we talked about virtue being one and many like a face, where all the parts are parts of a whole that work together as a functional unit. Then we talked about
aggregate.
yeah, virtue as an aggregate where all the parts are somehow the same, but the quantity changes. It seems like we got a third one and many here
What I'm
going
saying,
a different way. And the one in many is one of imitation or reflection. That's the one that I have in mind. Because the thing imaged in a reflection is
as
one
the
thing.
thing,
but the reflection is multi-perspectival, it's manyness. And so it again is the reflection is what it is a reflection of. And in being so is the thing that it is, but simultaneously is not what it is a
the thing
reflection.
that it is, exactly. It is an imitation. Imitation. That's what it is. But to be an imitation is just to be what you're not. To be what you're not.
And sorry, the reason why that one mini is interesting, I think, is I actually don't know why it's interesting. I know that there was a point that it had relevance for this conversation too, and I think it was in the context of virtue. But if someone could find it for me, please. My eyes are weak.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it will, this will be, so if we take, so we're participating in relatedness. We're participating in being in, and we can say that that is an image of or a reflection of relatedness,
Yeah.
or of the perfect relation,
Yeah.
which is, Hadley just thought something.
Oh, okay. The point was in terms of the relatedness. So we were saying that relatedness, that overlap is a sort of consequence of virtue, or is the relationship is a consequence of virtue rather than is the interfacing where virtue shows through. So in that sense, it would be that you're saying that virtue is relatedness, or we came to
Nah.
that. Sure. Uh, go for it.
So I'm
Clarify.
saying, like being is related, like the base condition of opposition or
Yeah.
relatedness, and then I'm seeing the virtuosities as manners of relatedness.
All right.
Okay.
I think I hear you.
Because the point that I wanted to get to, or the point that I thought I should have gotten to, was that
Mm,
the most sort of perfect relationship is a sort of self-sameness, or a oneness with itself. And so
yeah.
in imitating that oneness, or that oneness being in being in relationship, we're imitating a oneness, and we're sort of failing to be that oneness by coming together as a unity of different things. That
Let's
relationshiping is itself an imitation of the oneness that virtue is.
Yeah.
Was what I was gonna say. Might be wrong.
Yeah, that I think that's let's push in, like the, what did you say? Uh
The
uh
relationship is an imitation of
Look,
the one.
if that's wrong, I've been lost. I've been more lost than I thought I was. I mean, I have been lost, but if that is wrong, I've been more lost than I thought. I thought that's what you were saying, Danny. So
and
I had a bit thingy with the word relationship, because I was always thinking relationship requires parts to relate to each other to make a unit. A unit. But I was talking about a relationship where something relates to itself, which is what Headley's bring up. So I'm asking, are you saying us imitating the thing that relates to itself harmoniously by us bringing parts harmoniously is like virtue, or is virtue? That's what I'm
I
trying to
wanted
figure out.
I wanted to push into why is self-sameness a perfect example of relationship?
Because it
Because there
doesn't
is
fall
no
apart.
outside to integrate.
Yeah, it never falls apart. It is a relationship that always is. There's
Imagine
always
everybody functioning under a complete and whole conception of truth. There is no need for opposition or anything outside. Our wills are the same because we all know and choose the thing. We are so.
we need a board with circles. That's what
That
we
there
need.
is no other. There is no other. We are like this, right? And to
wait.
simulate the like thisness, right?
Come together.
We have different things that give us a situational togetherness.
Mm.
Right? And those things are all supposed to point out towards something.
I think there's a dialectical move that can be made here. If Dan wanted to play this card. So in the self-sameness unity that you've given, everybody thinks alike, and there's no need to go outside of the self-sameness because there's no need for anything to change. Well, by Dan supposing appropriate opposition as the thing that we should all be doing or thinking, isn't he sort of giving us the next best substitute in inappropriately opposing, in disagreeing with each other, in in the non-identity of our thoughts? Our thoughts have a sort of identity. We we are
But I,
suggesting everybody should not think the same thing, and in doing so, giving them something that has a sort of self-sameness to.
but, but I thought what makes that appropriate is a focus into the same thing. If I was understanding Daniel,
Yeah.
if I was understanding Daniel
So-
correctly, the focus is still the same thing. So there's still this unifying factor. Now I think it would be inappropriate. Think opposition would be completely inappropriate if we got here and everybody was having their own conversation. Right? It wouldn't even be a meeting. You know what I mean? It's not even the thing. So there has to be this shared thing. And I would like to think the conversation, what makes it appropriate is the fact that we are moving closer towards the thing, or
But
rather the
in
truth
the
of
case
the
that
thing.
in the case that you just gave, the case where people are just saying random things, I think the appropriate in your definition of appropriate opposition is superfluous. The case where we're all saying different things, we're not opposing each other. We're just saying stuff. It's unrelated. There's no relationship. There's no opposition. Opposition itself seems to be the thing.
Relation.
Yeah, it
I
seems
see your
higher
point. I see
degree
your
of
point.
appropriate. If I just
But
started
what
talking
about
about
negative
lion,
opposition? What about negative, inappropriate opposition? For example, Hadley brought this up, right? What if we are in some relation, but I'm just trying to convince you of what I believe, not because it's true, but simply because I believe it. That seems to be very different from us trying to convince each other to get to the truth. As opposed, I mean, that's what happens in the dialogues, right? Somebody starts off with their point of view, and slowly they get convinced towards seeking the truth, and it's either they stay and try and seek, or they pull a who's it? Themisic? Who's that guy from the Republic?
Thrasymachus.
Thrasymachus, and they're like, "Fuck this! This is my argument. I'm out after it." Right? He is obviously inappropriate. It was obviously inappropriate. He ended the relationship right then and there. He ended the relationship right then and there after he made his points. There was no relationship after that.
yeah, but there was
still,
no
when he was
opposition.
making the point,
That
there was still a relationship.
after he leaves, after the point is made, there is no opposition. The opposition is in the act of the point making. You're exemplifying that if opposition is the most virtue-like or the most being-like thing, then obviously by not
All
opposing
right,
him,
I hear you. I
the
hear you. I
relationship
think I hear you, Andy.
so
Now.
far as
I think
opposition is not.
I
Right?
think I hear you. So, in a way, a relationship and opposed and an appropriate opposition can't be separated.
So if opposition is the closest substitute that we have, or the most virtue-like or being-like, because we've already argued for the unity of all of these things several times, then as soon as opposition stops, why do you think Socrates keeps getting into these arguments? What's the big deal about these arguments anyways? He's opposing people, and insofar as he opposes, sorry, I'm trying to push my reading of your thesis down to the limit. Insofar as he opposes people, and insofar as they oppose him, they are to a higher degree. There exists something that wasn't there prior to their opposition. And that ceases to be as soon as the opposition ceases to be. It's a shared relationship of opposing.
that phrase, opposition is the most being-like thing. Opposition is the most being-like thing.
Appropriate opposition.
Yeah, and that reintroduces the
Opposition.
like
Yeah.
what confers the appropriateness.
It seems we've moved back now that Hadley's made this
That
point.
appropriateness is not an appropriate thing to add to this definition. What you guys have is
That's what I'm saying. Like the reason I'm adding it is because it re-emphasizes another point. Remember the point of the true thing and the false thing. It seems appropriate opposition and true opposition seem to be the same thing. It seems that when something is appropriate, it's truly that thing. Right? So true opposition and appropriate opposition seem to be the same thing here.
Yeah,
Abigail is deep in something.
I'm very reluctant to separate. I mean, to not want to separate opposition and relationship. I want to say there is a type of opposition that destroys relationship but forces the relating.
That forces the relating.
So I have to be. You are my teacher, or we are in a tat, and you're a tat thing. I cannot escape you. But you are so horribly abrasive that I do not want to engage. You have broken down the very thing you're supposed to be signposting to. That person is not gonna. Whatever you do now, it's like that horrible person you engage with, and they overcome you with their argument. They force it on you, and you try and go, no, well, I see things a little. They don't come with you on the journey. They just, this is what it is. They've destroyed the relationship. Now, every time you come to that person, you are less interested in whatever it is they're signposting because you do not see it from your perspective. It can be true. It can be reality, right? But I don't want to relate with you to patch up my understanding of reality prime. I stay away from you now. I just nod and let go. It's a false harmony. It's a false relating. I have to. I'm forced by circumstance to relate with you. I do not relate with any genuineness so as to walk away with any sort of.
But sorry. Aren't you always forced into these relationships? Isn't that the context of being? Aren't you always faced with people that suck at arguments and that just don't engage and that you don't want to relate to? And isn't that not a failure on their behalf to oppose you incorrectly, but it's a failure on your behalf to be appropriately opposed to them? The people the most difficult, I mean, it's a very rare thing in a platonic dialogue for someone to walk away. And I think Thrasymachus is a prime example of that weirdness where Socrates tries his hardest, but he just can't. He can't find that point of relation. And that's maybe, in a way, is about to highlight what I'm about to argue for. But in all the other cases, he's got difficult interlocutors. Meno sucks at arguing. Protagoras can't follow an argument. He's shouting out poems and shit in the middle of this conversation. And all this time, Socrates handles and has this power to oppose people and to find that ability to get them into a state of opposition themselves. The failing that I'm pointing to here, and the one that's inevitable, the one that you're struggling with in your case, where there's someone that just really sucks at opposing and you can't deal with them, that's because you're human. And what it is to be beings like us is not to be that thing in itself. It's not to be the perfect being. It's not to be virtuous. Our virtue is a virtue-like thing. It's opposition. And in so being, it's not free of defect. We have these situations of failing, and these failings are not, they prove what
our virtue is becoming. Our virtue is becoming, and in order for it to become, we have to fail at it. We have to fail at being it.
Understandably, but what I'm trying to highlight here is opposition, our understanding of opposition, that there is a type of opposition that is antithetical to relationship. It does not create the sort of medium that would
the appropriate
signpost
opposition.
to the thing, and it engenders an attitude in the minds of the people. Wherever they meet somebody like you, they recoil. So you are maiming people through certain types of opposition. You are maiming them, right? Which I'm trying to stress once more, the idea of proportional opposition. Is it proportional?
All right, now I get
I'm
your
trying
point.
to stress that and its importance, and I'm trying to get us to not say opposition simpliciter. I'm trying to get us to add that nuance in, because
Where
it is very important.
where's the proportion or the measure came in the last dialogue, the measure. Like where's the proportion, like where's it coming from?
It seems benefit is what we use. It seems benefit is what, or rather the gauge of benefit is what we use to see if the measurement was appropriate. Because it seems like when the opposition was appropriate, it benefits both the people who are in the relationship. And it seems when it is not appropriated, it does not benefit the people nor the relationship. It destroys it. So it seems a way to measure appropriateness is to measure whether it was beneficial to the thing or the parties of the thing.
I would have said friendship, the friendship itself. So to know that I am proportionally opposed to people is to push the envelope, but not to push it so as to sort of galvanize his thinking, to allow him his freedom in opposing me, and not push to convince, but to push to explore. I know that about him, right? So me being proportional, it's me respecting who he is and trying to maintain what he is through what we're doing to point to that thing. The moment I fall out of the fold of friendship, I know the thing for myself and I'm trying to impose it on you. I am drawing you by force into the thing. The thing is no longer teaching. I am teaching. I have taken the thing up for myself and I bludgeon people with it, and people recoil.
But how can you take the thing up into yourself? How do you do that? How do you bludgeon them
You
with the
assume it. You assume it. You do what the Pharisees did. They deal with scripture all the time. So I've read so much scripture and I parrot so much scripture, right? So I think I'm in perfect communion with the thing itself, with being. Because, for example, I know the scriptures, and the scriptures tell me everything I can know as a human being about being. And I come to everybody who does not practice it in the way that I understand, and I beat them over the head. I do not question my perspective of the thing or my understanding of scripture and re-up my understanding. I think I know it. And
But
I drag everybody to it.
Yeah, so you're not bludgeoning them with virtue. You're bludgeoning them with some presumed idea that you have. You're bludgeoning them with your thoughts, and that seems slightly different. That virtue. If you could bludgeon someone with virtue, then virtue could harm. And I don't think you want to say that virtue can harm.
It's not virtue.
Look, I want to say there is an attitude that draws people away from turning themselves towards virtue. I think that's
Sure.
That's my last point.
I can agree with that.
That is assuming, let's say, I see or I know the general virtue, and I police the way you do the virtue instead of making you look towards the virtue and doing the internal turning yourself. So I assume I'm the teacher, and I know that this is kindness, and I force you into this understanding of kindness And then, can you see how the friendship has completely left the fold? So the best manner of teaching for me is friendship. You drop position. Like Sipho said, older scholar, drop position.
Yeah, just
Right?
to just reiterate my position here. You're not bludgeoning them with virtue, right? Because we've already agreed that virtue is good, virtue is being. We've done this whole unity thesis. And if we say that you could bludgeon someone with virtue, or you could turn someone away from virtue with virtue, you'd be harming them with something good, which is completely contradictory, right? The good never harms, all of that rubbish that we like to hold. But what
You're rubbish.
what you said that's interesting, and I think what's maybe worthwhile for our conversation as friends is perhaps that
Why do we need to reinforce that we are friends, gents?
just in case is that there's something. This brings us back to a question we tried to investigate earlier. There's something about wanting to teach virtue that is a little bit unvirtuous, or it's ingenuine. It's this when you're inappropriately opposing someone, whatever we might call that, and we're talking about this type of opposition. Isn't that opposition exemplified the inappropriate opposition? Isn't the inappropriate opposition exemplified most by the one who wants to teach virtue because they know what it is? Isn't the person who claims to be a teacher of virtue precisely the bludgeoner that you're talking about? Aren't they the one pushing an agenda onto people saying that this is virtue and you must learn these phrases off by heart so that everybody that does not conform to my definition should get clubbed? Isn't there something so weird about that? So peculiar about this thing that should be good being possibly the 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 worst thing that one could do. That trying to be teachers of virtue, that assuming that it can be taught, that I think we've come to a position where we've come to a proposal of teaching that avoids some of these problems, and it's perhaps worth reiterating that. But it's this assuming, it's this closeness, this lack of opposition, this holding fast to something that really is the end of conversation, that is the end of this dialogical process, that is the end of opposition, that is the end of sort of, this virtuous activity that we presuppose.
And that seems to tie in back to the point that if we found an answer, we don't have to look for an answer. Now we're imposing the answer. It ties back to that. We don't have to look for an answer once we found it. So what the hell is the point?
2 seconds. I want to say, I think, I should say that first. I think the only reason, well, one of the reasons there is a holding fast to is because there was an inappropriate opposition. Right? The only reason I think I know this now for myself is because somebody has wrestled me so hard that I needed to double down on what I know and hold on to it.
Before we even get there, I agree with you. But if we look at inappropriate opposition as a sort of holding fast to, we get back to where we started. A holding fast to is not an opposition. It's itself a form of fixedness. It doesn't seek it seeks to stay the same. It seeks to remain comfortable. It doesn't do the inappropriate opposition is not opposition.
Sure.
And so
inappropriate opposition is not opposition.
Yeah, remember when we were saying it seems true opposition, it seems appropriate opposition is the true opposition. It seems another type of opposition that's inappropriate
is not
something
really
other than opposition.
Is not opposition.
It seems to be something other than opposition. Like domination, maybe. I don't know. Maybe domination would be an appropriate word, but it seems domination falls from opposition.
All right, 2 seconds. I'm trying to wrap my head around the false opposition or inappropriate opposition not being opposition. When we say opposition, in my mind, 2 things pop up. One going this way and the other going, oh, maybe this is a better idea.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not this one being fixed on its own. It's being fixed and pushing against this, which is trying to push against this to open it. So this is the idea we have of opposition. So the false opposition wants to say, you come with me, so you stay the same as me, validate my position. The other saying, no, you need to expand. You're holding on to this, which is anti the position you want to actually take. And these are doing this. When we look at the person who's inappropriately opposed, they are still opposed to another person. Otherwise, they're just chilling and doing their thing. There's no idea of opposition with a single person holding on to knowledge. The opposition plays out in the presence of another.
Sure, I agree with you. It's sorry, C4. Maybe you can maybe you'll have a better solution than this. The opposition that is opposition is this. That's the relationship, right? But you can have another type of opposition, and the opposition where someone holds fast or doesn't oppose is an opposition like this. It's running up against a wall consistently. It's someone holding fast to a position and refusing to change. You can push as much as you want if they're not opposing you, especially if they're not opposing you, if they're not pushing back. That's when this is happening. It's not an opposition. It's one-sided. And in so being, turns out not to be truly opposition.
Another way to think of it is true opposition will sustain opposition because the relationship has to have opposition. I don't know if I'm making it better or worse. If the opposition is inappropriate, then you just completely dismantle the person. Then there's no more opposition after that. It's hard. Was there ever opposition, if you really think about it? If there was never any engagement with the person, right? If you never engaged with the person, you were just making your point and nobody cared.
Yeah, the harm is the losing the capacity to be opposed. It's like I am harmed to the degree that I'm not opposed or I'm not in relationship, or
I will not allow myself to come into opposition and lose that which I have built my identity around. So
I don't know if it's going to be a recurring question. So I don't know if it might be fruitful. So I think it is something. I think it is a question. I think it is a question that persists, and maybe in a very immediate way for each. It's like how does one, like, what gives the measure? Like, where's the appropriateness? And like I'm on board with the base, with like putting real metaphysical status into opposition. And then in relationship, like what gives the appropriateness, like maybe like an example, like so my okay, be personal then. My younger brother's wrestling with anger. So then I come and it's like a kicking and screaming situation, but it doesn't get there immediately. There's a turning away. I come to him, I embrace him, and then it's successive movements, and it becomes a kicking and screaming. But there's this like ambiguous. It's not ambiguous. It's contradictory. There's a division. He wants to be held and embraced, but then that embrace is so that he can oppose something, so that he can be angry at and towards something. So then what, like, in an instance like this, where it starts to get like, because I want to push the question into, I don't know if it's, okay, the last and final temptation of Christ, which is the use of force, power. Here, have power. And then he's not tempted, or he does away with it. How or why or so I've muddled my question, but it's like there's opposition, but what is it that gives me appropriateness that means I'm not applying force? I'm realizing that we've been answering this question. So I don't know why I feel like there's something.
Maybe we've been missing it in the way we've been answering it. Maybe we've been missing it. Can you just clarify one point about the question? This one point I'm confused about. Are you asking how do we know if it was appropriate, or are you asking what brings appropriateness?
Yeah, like what gives the measure, like the measuredness, like we hear in contact, and then I don't push too hard there, and I release there, and I don't grab there, like there's like a measuredness, there's a proportion, there's like a.
Isn't that the true nature of the thing? You know, I don't know if I'm even making sense, but for example, if I had a 500 millimeter glass and I had a 250 millimeter glass, I had a 300 millimeter glass, and I poured the appropriate amount into two of them, and I started pouring an amount that is not suitable into the other one. It starts overflowing, and it makes the vessel not perform its appropriate function. So isn't it the true nature of the vessel that determines what would be appropriate towards it?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm making sense.
The example that I had in mind was very different to yours, Sipo, but I want to try and tie it to yours because I think that the true nature of the thing is what determines the responsiveness. But the example that I had was Daniel sort of brought up this when it's appropriate and why we push and pull at certain points in an argument and not others. And it always reminds me of playing music. There's this thing, I guess, because I studied jazz and because we did so much improvisation and stuff, there's a sort of responsiveness that you develop by knowing the nature of the thing. So like jazz musicians don't just improvise randomly. They learn the scales of music and they learn different types of music. And so that context determines what they improvise, what they solo over. And there's this sort of skillfulness that these musicians have in their ability to respond to the nature of the thing that they're responding to. And so too, with virtuous people, or people that are good at this sort of thing, they know just when to push and pull. Like in a class or in a teaching situation, a good teacher knows just when to forte before really driving the point home. Whereas someone else, like me, would emphasize at the wrong moment. And so it's this sort of learnedness that you acquire through an interfacing or through a constant being in contact with this thing. It's a being in contact with and responding to that is sort of developed through this practice.
You have to understand the thing.
Yeah.
Which is why the basis for me is friendship.
No, I agree with you. You're not gonna
My
understand
interest
the
is
thing
not
about
looking
the
after it.
relationship with people.
Yeah,
We
but
need
the I'm in agreement with the friendship, but then it's still pushing the thing. Like it's still the thing that confers. It's still the thing that enables me to be a friend. It's
Look, let's say I am Socrates. I'm out in the marketplace and I need friends in the sense that I need a perfect stranger to help me think about a certain topic or to provide a topic, right? So I go out, I find somebody, I ask them, do you know what virtue is? Or something. I wait for somebody to find me and ask me, do you know what virtue is? No, I don't. But you know what, my good chap? Let's think about it. What do you know about it? Right? I am extending, this is my definition of friendship, is extending out vulnerability to the other. So I extend out my vulnerability. I do not know this. You do. I drop my, I've been inquiring so long that I could probably sit there and go like this and come to some iffy idea of the thing. But you know, I don't trust myself that much. I know that I don't know. So I'm going to drop my position and go, well, tell me about it. You tell me about it, I have a listen. I go, but wait a minute, what about, and wait a minute, what about, well, what do you think? Well, I think maybe, no, I just don't know. I just don't know. We both don't know. How interesting. What could it be? Well, from what we've said, and we go down the line, right? I have made myself vulnerable to you in coming to you for something that I don't know. And you have made yourself vulnerable in return by recognizing that you do. We have a unity of nature. We don't know.
Are you dropping yourself?
Fitting turns, changes, we now do something.
Are you dropping
Right.
yourself
So,
if you really don't know? Like, I know it might not be important, but it seems like if you really don't know, you I can see the extension of vulnerability is in that. Look, I will be honest with you, and I'll be vulnerable and show you that after all these things which I've learned, I've become more certain that I don't know. Like I don't know, is it dropping in the sense that like you're letting go of what you know, or is it dropping in the sense that you're letting go of the character that looks like you know when you really don't?
it could be a bit of both. Right? Dropping the character that looks like they don't know. So I'm letting you in, telling you I don't. But it's also acknowledging that what I assume I do not know. Because one thing that Socrates must know is that inquiry is good. It causes no harm, certainly. So from that he can go, well, I've been doing this thing. Well, I've been trying it for so long. I can inquire by myself, right? And I can ask you just to check whereabouts I am and sort of, do you get me? There is so much vulnerability in the move he chooses to make.
I get you. It's look, the issue with Socrates is, and yeah, I know Socrates supporters are gonna come pitchfork and all of that. I've got nothing against Socrates. The thing is right. He's right about a lot of things, but we're gonna have to question his ass too, because at the end of the day, the issue with Socrates, I have with Socrates, right? And maybe I'm just misunderstanding something about him. Yeah, inquiry, right? Saying can do no harm, right? Like benefit because it does not do any harm. But that's what got him killed. And not only is it what got him killed, it's what got him into a state where he isn't even sure that he can inquire anymore. So that death that inquiry brought prevented more inquiry for him. In other words, if inquiry does not harm, right? then death did not harm him, right? Then death did not harm him. But he's unable to inquire, so he doesn't have the thing that was good.
No,
Or
no, no,
rather, we're not
no.
even sure that he
Can
was
I,
able to inquire.
can I
Now, he no
interrupt?
longer has the thing that was good now because he's dead. So
Can I,
that's the one thing I don't get about
I'm
his.
jumping in here. Avide said that Socrates has to assume one thing, and you said
Yeah.
that he has to assume that inquiry is good. And then from there, he can use that assumption to determine who he speaks to.
Did she say assume? I thought you said know one thing. That was why I jumped in. I thought you said
Sure,
he has to
sure.
know one thing.
Either way, I'm going to take knowing and assuming to be the same thing here. It doesn't matter.
All
If
right.
if Socrates does take that thing to be the good, inquiry as good,
Yeah.
then Sipo's problem poses a lot of issues because a cessation of inquiry is a cessation of the good. And it
Mm.
seems like, from what we've been arguing earlier, the good can't cease to be because it's somehow one with this thing that we call being. Anyways, long story short, I don't think I don't think Socrates identifies inquiry with the good. I think inquiry is good like in that it doesn't cause any harm. The good is always beneficial.
Does he
And
say
we
the
can't
highest
know the
men?
nature of we can't know because we're men, we can't know the nature of the good itself. It's the sun.
All
We
right,
look at
all
the
right,
sun and we're blinded by the sun. So the next best thing is to inquire into. So we get a sort of substitute or a sort of surrogate good,
all right,
which
all right,
is
all right.
activity of inquiry. And if we take that surrogate good as a sort of, the activity that's appropriate to us, then its cessation or death is possibly not harmful because it might lead to a state of knowledge of the good, or it might lead to a state of non-being. It's he addresses it in the Apology and the Phaedo. And again,
He does.
it's going to bring us to some formulation of the immortality of the soul and its kinship with things like good, one, many, etc., etc. So before we even get there, we can't assume that inquiry is the good. And I think we can't use that assumption to guide we can't use the assumption that inquiry is good to guide who we inquire with. I think what makes Socrates uniquely valuable as a caricature, even if he's not the real Socrates, is his willingness to engage with everyone. He wants to engage with Thrasymachus. He takes him up. He argues with the worst person to argue with, the tyrant of argument, who's not going to respond. And he wants to. He's really there for it. He's not determined by any presuppositions. He's there to explore the arguments. And in that sense, the knowing that he doesn't know and the inquiry that he takes part in, I think this also comes back to your point earlier, Sipo, that knowing that he doesn't know and that bringing his interlocutors to a state of the suspension of knowledge is itself a sort of purifying act. It sort of brings them closer to the nature of what they are. It stops them from identifying a sort of false part of themselves, what they are. So yeah, that's my rant. I'm done. Stop.
Okay. What I meant by the whole Socrates point is to show you the way in which I see vulnerability working. I'm providing a possible, an alternate route that he could have taken, a different person he could have been that didn't extend vulnerability out, therefore didn't premise friendship as the basis for relating. So the vulnerability is me, 3 types of friends I see: inner temple, outer court, out on the street. So you're out on the street, I can extend a type of vulnerability to you that doesn't let you into my temple. So you don't know the most sacred, fine-grained things about me. I keep you out there, but I can still extend a version of friendship to you. The inner court people, I can do the same. A little more detailed than the people out there, right? And then the inner court people are my BFFs that I share everything with. And those people I relate to fundamentally different. I don't have to be politically correct with those people, and they can oppose me in ways that the person on the street can't. If I say something to the person on the street that I do not know, right, and I sort of try to prod thought in them in order to stimulate discussion, things go awry. I get cancelled on Twitter.
But yeah,
Inappropriate explosion.
isn't that again a problem with the people on the street or the general state of society? Like, isn't your getting cancelled a reflection of the unwillingness to oppose in modern society, or the unwillingness to oppose currently
It
prevailing
is
in
that I am not in appropriate position. Appropriate, like the
I don't
vulnerability I extend is not for the section in which I extend it. Right? There's
Look,
certain
you
topics.
I don't think so, because
look,
in
no,
the
no, I
again
think you're both right, but like you're both right about the same
saying
thing, just
we're saying the
from
same thing in
different.
different ways, people, and that's why I'm trying to bring it out here.
Yeah.
Avila is saying that she's being inappropriately vulnerable when she reveals her fine-grained secrets and discusses these things with the people on the street, right?
Mm.
That seems to be the case. And she's saying that if she doesn't use politically correct language on the street, she's going to get canceled, and that this is inappropriate opposition because it breeds a stasis. It results in a sort of non-opposition because it's not the right type of opposition. What I want to say rather is the exact opposite of Vile. That that having your fine-grained distinctions in court, in temple, wherever you wanna put those distinctions upon, that's itself a hindrance to opposition. And you can see why it would be, because once you assume that, you close yourself off to a certain sect of people. And the reason you're closing yourself off is because you think you're not appropriately opposed to them. But what's in fact happening, and if I'm correct about the nature of opposition, which is very likely wrong, is that they're not appropriately opposed to you at all. The people that cancel you, the people that don't interact with you, are closed and held fast in a position where they think you're unwilling to change, or they believe that you're not an opposition, that they can't oppose you, because what you are is fundamentally closed off to the views they hold. When you say, I don't know, gay people are bad, to use the worst possible example, and they go,
That's
oh,
how we lost the series. We lost the series. We fucking lost.
inappropriate opposition. I'm using an example, people. You say,
I think people are gonna care now.
apologies, guys. You can cut it out if you want to.
No, all good.
When you say gay people are bad, and the gay people on the street say, yeah, fuck you, we're not talking, then that's because they see you as not a real opposition. It's not worthy of opposing. They're not really gonna go, no, we're actually quite nice people. We're good. And there are many arguments that are coherent that show that gay people are good people. And those don't depend on, some weird form of prefacing. It's just I'm gonna get canceled when I go to the US. You are
I don't know you, bro. I just met you on this.
Exactly. I don't know you. Who are you to have this expansive general view which opposes me without relation? Who are you? How dare you? You're encroaching on my territory without invitation. You are in the wrong place.
Look, I think what has happened is we've separated the right thing from the right place, from the right person, and the right time. So now we've come up with a bunch of examples where there's been the right thing happening at the wrong place, or example where the right person was doing the wrong thing, or even worse, an example where the wrong person was doing the right thing. And this is the problem. You gotta take all of them at once. Otherwise, it's not hitting one of those doesn't seem to be enough. Seems like we gotta hit all of them. And this is the problem. Hitting all of them at the same time is a fucking problem. It's a problem. It's a problem. Because every example we've given, the reason there's been a problem is because one of those things wasn't right, even though some of those things were right. I know the others wasn't right. So if it was a person, if it was the right person, they were doing the wrong thing. If it was the right person doing the right thing, they were doing it at the wrong time, at the wrong place.
That's the matter of virtue. Isn't that the whole of virtue? The thing we've been discussing, how it shows up in situational context, its complexity,
Exactly.
its manyness.
So this is why I'm saying you're both right, but it's difficult for you not to argue being both right because the examples you're standing from differ.
Or appropriate opposition in
Perhaps,
the doing.
perhaps rather our inability to agree is a sign that the opposition itself is something productive, or the opposition itself holds even in relationships where we are at such odds with each other that we can still be here in the same room. You guys haven't just ended the chat and kicked me out. Fortunately, thanks. Friendship.
Exactly. Now, which ties to Aurelius' point of the appropriate place, right? With the appropriate people. Now, if it was a person we don't know, and they just said this shit, and we were all out in public shopping, I would have acted like I never met you in my life. Like I never met you in my life for my sake. For my sake.
So the this the a few things. Death, then that good that went beyond death, and then is somehow not beyond death, and then that the requirement that this thing that gives appropriateness is not a thing. If it is a thing, it's going to be used to bludgeon each other. And then that, like, this ground of relationship, well, that relationship is an opposition. So it's always like it's always a toggling. The non-thing that affords that, the non-thing that affords that for me must be a person. And a person without body, but with body. A spirit.
So a possessor of persons.
The living word, our beginning. The living word.
But why is it the non-being? Why is the living word the non-being, not the being?
Why is the non-being what?
Why is the living word the non-being instead of the being?
We seem to be running up these, again, I'm not going to answer it directly. We seem to be running up these distinctions between being and non-being and the living word being that sort of thing. But it's because I think what we're failing to do when we say that opposition is virtue, and when we say that inquiry is good and all of those things, the qualification is for humans.
Oh, yes.
Opposition is the most virtue-like thing for humans. Inquiry is as close as we can get for us. We never get to the virtue itself. We never get to the good itself. All of the stuff that we're doing is just the stuff that's good for us. It's what we do, and it's the closest that we're going to get. And so I don't think that we want to say that the living word is close to non-being. I think the living word would probably be something closer to being.
Being, yeah.
So
that's what I'm asking. Why is it not being? I would think it's closer to being or being.
I think we are making the mistake of identifying it with non-being because in some sense we have a bit of non-being in us that is closer to what we're doing. We're misidentifying its nature because what's good for us has some form of non-being to it.
I don't know if I said non-being.
That last part, what's good for us has a form of non-being in it. How does it have a form of non-being in it?
Because what it is to be the type of thing that we are has both being and non-being. We're the type of thing
All right, all right. Because okay, I see what you mean. We're not fully being.
Yeah, and so
Opposition is a virtue. Sorry.
Yeah,
what did you say? Avi?
Opposition is a virtue? Question mark.
Opposition as human virtue.
Opposition is a human virtue? Question mark. I
appropriate
don't
opposition.
know. Very uncomfortable. Very, very
I
uncomfortable.
probably made the mistake of going too hard on that.
Appropriate opposition.
I feel
Let's
like
put that.
I've joined the series midway through, and you guys had a good definition and an appropriate one. And I've come in and
But the thing is this.
derailed.
Nah,
No,
we've deepened it.
the thing is
Yeah.
this. This is why last time. I was saying, when we were talking about the path, I was like, virtue strikes me as water, and then the way we see virtue strikes me as containers which capture that water. And I think we make the mistake of thinking the container, or in the container being an action, is tied to virtue. In other words, I don't think wisdom is necessarily and now I'm not shooting down everything you've said so far. I don't think wisdom is necessarily a mother virtue and all these other things. I think all these other things are they just what we call the application of wisdom in a certain context. I don't think they are things. I think they are what we call the application of wisdom in a certain context. I think, for example, let's take, for example, say we have Hadley, right? And Hadley is Hadley. But now say Hadley goes to work as a police officer. Hadley, being a police officer is different from being normal Hadley. Being a police officer requires things of Hadley. So being good Hadley and being a good police officer isn't necessarily the same thing. But you need to be Hadley to go be that police officer who is Hadley. I don't know if I'm making sense in what I'm saying. A Hadley could be a police officer. He could be a fireman. He could be a thingy. He could be a thingy. He could be a thingy. And every time he gets into this position, he has to act appropriately to this position.
Yeah.
But every time what we're seeing is Hadley acting appropriately. It's just that this position appropriately looks like this. But really, we're just seeing him acting appropriately. And I, in that sense, I don't think all these other things are things. I think we're just seeing the same thing in different contexts, and then we call it something else. So this separation we keep making of it being parts and it being, I don't think they're even things. I think like the perspective of a shadow thing, we're just looking at the same thing, but from another place, if I'm making any fucking sense at all.
Look, I've heard it said that wisdom is the crown of all the virtues.
I've gone to the point that like I'm thinking it's with it.
I think
I've gone to the point where I think human virtue, right? I've gone to the point where I'm thinking human virtue is wisdom.
There's you brought in police and the image or the water. So this is what really pressed this idea of, it's one of the things that pressed the idea of appropriate opposition. When you begin to consider the consequence of Jesus and Socrates killed, like you put it into that social context for the kind of enactment that we're kind of gesturing to or imitating toward. But so like they're able to puncture social consensus or coherence and lift it, we're saying. And then we've been perplexed about like what is it that they were following that like afforded that gave them, like, what were they doing? So the police is it's because the enforcers of law, the ones who enforce law. So and our context and that appropriate opposition came up in our context, also relevant thing. This in the Beatitudes, when Jesus starts the Sermon on the Mount, it's like, can almost be understood like a succession, and the starting at the poverty of spirit, like a lowliness, which is that capacity to be filled, and then at the I think it's the last one or second last, the peacemakers, as almost the fulfillment of the Beatitudes. It's like being filled, and then the perfect enactment is the one who is peacemaking, who is being opposed in a manner that engenders peace, but then putting that, like, the tension of that peacemaking character or act in the context where, like, it will look like force or it will be force. So then in the context where force needs to be used, like, how, where is appropriateness conferred, or like how does one derive that in the, like, yeah, it's a, yeah, I guess that's why that question has been recurring for me.
That sounds like we're going back to measurement.
Yeah, the measure, like, what gives the measure of the touch of the like,
from a top-down perspective. I feel like I said this before. I don't know whether I keep missing the question. I don't know whether I keep missing the question, but from a top-down perspective, because now I'm combining the two answers with the nature of the thing in question. So suppose we are, I'm going to give an example. I don't know if it'll be good for us or anything, but suppose we're on a road trip, right? Suppose we're on a road trip, and then each of us have responsibilities to fulfill on this road trip, right? And if one of us doesn't fulfill the responsibility the way we're supposed to, the entire road trip isn't going to pan out the way we plan. So then, the nature of measurement is dictated by what we are collectively trying to do, right? So the moment what one party does not only fails to benefit what we are trying to do, but well, it fails to benefit, but by failing to benefit what it's trying to do, it also inhibits what we're trying to do. Then there's something off about the measure, something off about the measurement in which that party is doing it. Now, if we take the way we've been understanding virtue or goodness so far, if we take that and apply it to goodness, right, we would, let me not start with that. We need to understand what it is we're doing and what would benefit what we're doing. So if we use societal construct, what type of society are we? What are we aiming for as a society? Does that benefit what we are aiming for? No, it does not. So now we're talking in the context of what's good for the society. But now when we're talking about the context of what's good for the person, we have to understand that what's good for the society can contradict what's good for the nature of the person. It is possible that that can happen. And once you have that conflict, the person who prioritizes what's good for the person is going to be inappropriate to those who prioritize what's good for that society, that doesn't take into consideration what's good for that person. I don't know if that helps, answer, if that helps. So I'm saying it will be determined by the nature of the thing you're applying in question, what the appropriate measurement is. So if you care about the game we're playing as a social thingy in this social structure, then to you, anything that goes against that doesn't look appropriate. But now, if what we're focusing on is the good of the person, true good of the person, then what benefits that will be the appropriate measure. Now, the issues we'll have to know that, and it's difficult to know.
Sipo, what would you? How do you want to go?
Yeah, perhaps that's the point that I was trying to push earlier when I was sort of coming off as inappropriate with Avigile. That when a person is inappropriate, when a person seeks their own benefit, which contradicts society, that there's something wrong at large with society rather than with the person. That only in the case where society and person come apart, because society is fundamentally a product of peoples or a conglomerate of individuals, that only in that case is there this coming apart that happens to be. That where these sorts of things that happen, like cancellation or seeking one's own good over the good of others, that's the result of being in a form of society that's not, I guess, the perfect society, or that's not appropriate, or that's not virtuous. That's a reflection of, it's not a reflection of a failing of the individual. It's a failing, it's a reflection of the failing of the whole.
There is no unity. There is no common unity that makes it a society. It's only a society by name at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, somehow a society it has to include or be open to the possibility of things that are sort of external to, in opposition to. It has to have a sort of openness that's conducive to debate, argument, and opposition of the societal values. Somehow it has to have a sort of value, a value. It sort of has to value the measuring of values.
Yeah. They're like what's the vision we have here? Like what's the trip that we on? Like what's the destination or like
there seems to be more clarity now in the sense that, okay, our question, it was obvious, but it seems we didn't pay much attention to it in the beginning. Our question, can virtue taught, is now being streamlined to can human virtue be taught. Clearly, virtue in itself and virtue for human, even though we're talking about virtue, its application is different. So, in other words, it seems to suggest the question: does understanding virtue in itself benefit the virtue of human being? That's where my head is at. Does understanding virtue in itself in any form benefit virtue?
I think this can act as a measure. It's like then like relatedness, relating. Then those other considerations that would become them like pragmatic for us, like what is the nature of our then practical enactment like in the world? do we have to assess and then intervene at the level of gymnastics, geometry, and music? Or do we, so we pursuing the Parmenides now with that understanding that dialectic is the material that we should come over, and then is it that, because the sense is that we have a I was going to say like a clear sense of a vision, or just relatedness. Like this seems to be the destination, like, of the car trip.
What
So
is
then
what is the you're talking about?
this,
Yeah.
it's it's this, it's being opposed to one another in this manner. It's being related. It's the relatedness. It's philosophy. It's putting questions before ourselves and being over them for a few hours. Yeah.
And
I had a sense.
how does
Yeah.
I wasn't here for the beginning ones. I know that you said that the sort of framework of gymnastics, music, and geometry is sort of the Platonic version of fostering that. Could you maybe say more about how gymnastics or music or geometry could sort of foster this ability to be in opposition or to sort of conduct oneself with others in this way?
Yeah, I think you brought up in relation to the jazz and the sense of music. There's like a sense for the whole almost, and a quality of musicality that affords ability to participate with others in something that's being generated together, and to get a feel for that and a feel for being harmonious in relationship with that. That seems to be like what musicality confers. The math, I think that's just or math or geometry is such a condensed or fine instance of learning, that, or like it's it's really intelligible. So it seems to be a big bang for buck, both in terms of intellect, and then also a like a knock-on thing is the existential confrontation with the act of learning, or of the necessity of being mistaken in the process of learning. That math seems quite unique in affording. And the Meno was the first text that we went over, and they go through that geometry. Then the gymnastic, sure, this one, because it's body is so elusive, and I feel like a preference, and a preference to its importance. And I don't know if that's because of a cultural context of like disembodiment, or of like, I think the way that we are related, so how would there might be like simple things like a subtle fear doesn't interrupt the progression of conversation. That might be like a more martial, like a bodily fear, like a fear of bodily safety, which I think can arise. Then apart from general like strength and health, people might have ideas around more in the martial context of the gymnastic, but the sense of
It also seems to be an appropriateness to the body. appropriateness to its unity, how it performs in
Yeah,
uniform function. Those parts perform a uniform function.
it's a tactile immediate instance of opposition. Like even the way it's formed, it's in like an opposition to itself, and that's how it moves.
Somehow it does it appropriate.
Yeah, to more and less degrees.
And with this, I think the examples are good. I think the examples really bring out how you can get someone to do, I guess, the right thing at the right time in the right way in all of those contexts. With the bodily example, I don't know, attacking someone in the wrong way might cause injury or self-harm or something like that. Or in the wrong context, if you use the wrong move against someone, you're going to harm yourself by doing something incorrect because of the assumptions that you make. And then so too with music, if you play the wrong note at the wrong time or something like that, then you're going to make something that sounds bad. The maths example is much more difficult to find a case like that. But I think all of that makes sense. What I want to ask from a pragmatic standpoint is, who do you teach this to, and to what extent? When do you let go of the sort of analog modes of um cultivating virtue and let them fly into this realm by themselves?
That's Thank you for that question. That's the importance of being developmentally informed to some degree of developmental stages. That has to come in somewhere in that consideration. And then thinking about, then if the thinking is intervention, then the thinking needs to be informed in that manner by development. The other there was another, sure.
How you
It's a
holding on
question.
to it?
Yeah?
All right. No, I was going to say, while you're holding on to that,
No, go for it.
it seemed, yes, I don't know, it seems that virtue, based on everything you've said, it seems virtue can be taught, rather from what I'm understanding. Since virtue, it is, as we said, like light that penetrates through everything, and we're able to see the things because of that light. It seems that virtue can be taught, and it can be taught through any, if you have been taught to pay attention to virtue. In other words, after what we've just discussed, we have now brought up examples of different things in our examples, and all these different things we were looking at. The thing we were investigating, or the thing we were learning, we were looking into, was virtue. Now, obviously, what we go back to the teaching it or teaching of it. The teaching of it seems the teaching about it, yeah. Teaching about it is an essential step to learning of it. Doesn't seem like we can make you virtuous, but we can teach you the necessary tools for pursuing virtue. And that's basically by turning you to virtue, and you start to see virtue in everything. And then it's up to you from that point. I think that's what I've gotten from these meetings. I don't know if you guys seem to have gotten the same thing or you got something else out of it.
But
I think that's
what makes that, again, I want to just draw us back to the text and ask, if virtue is in everything, and what we're doing is making you more attentive to virtue or being able to pursue virtue, how is that different from what Protagoras purports to be doing? Why are we not Protagorean in our approach to teaching virtue?
Yeah, I think
Because unlike Protagoras, we're not claiming that what we're teaching or making virtuous. We're only claiming that it will turn your attention to virtue.
Okay. So you're not claiming to be teachers. You're not claiming to know what virtue is, which Protagoras does claim. You're not claiming to teach virtue. You're claiming to teach the tools to get to virtue or whatever that is, or turn yourself towards that. And so I think those are important distinctions to draw if you guys are gonna sort of propose something like this, because you're gonna need something to distinguish the true teacher over the false one.
yeah.
So we can turn your attention to, let's say, maybe turn your attention to the subject of virtue, and then in doing that, we give you I don't know whether we give you the capacity, but what at least you guys have seen, to, like what this interaction has done to me is, now whenever I leave, I don't know if it's just happening to me, like whenever I go out into the world, this is the same effect it had when I used to be in class. Whenever I go out to the world, now I'm starting to see the world through the lens of these discussions. And now I'm seeing these holes and parts. And now when I do something, I'm considering something I did not consider. That was that the appropriate thing to do at the appropriate time, and which seems now to be the beginning of the activity. The beginning of the activity. Now I want to know what the appropriate thing to do. I want to exercise the appropriate thing. But again, that is up to you. It seems that much is up to you. And perhaps that might also go to Meno, Plato, Socrates, and Meno's issue where they were like, look, so and so was virtuous, but how come his kid's not virtuous? So it's not an attempt. It's not a failure of an attempt of the parent, but really a failure of the attempt of the student, as the student could just have chosen not to pursue that because they didn't see it as something that's worthwhile to pursue. Which I guess now makes Avila's point in the second meeting come back to bite me in the ass, because it seems like we're separating teaching and learning, where the teacher did his part and the learner has to do their part, and they refuse to do the part they have to do alone in order to learn.
Yeah, I just want to affirm or reaffirm the fact that this very dialogue is the heart of it, like this relatedness. Then that orientation towards the creative constraints, or the creating of the like implicit space that makes possible the arising of the activity. So then thinking about the constraints that afford it or help it if it is to happen, and then the material and that's part of the constraints that you put into the container of proposing something. And this should, like you are reflecting, Sipol, like it should refract into every relationship in life. Then there's the like more peripheral considerations around an educational context, and then what are the given we've found at least the enactment of measuring, and we value that as being the thing to be doing, we can then use that to determine what activities help one come into that. And then like math is natural.
Yeah, man. Oh, what's the next step?
I may have misunderstood why we were sort of taking a ramble into virtue. I thought we were looking at virtue sort of as a way into character development, because I think when we spoke of pitching ourselves as an intervention, right, that a lot of us came to turn about the point of character development, and we were quite really stunned because we didn't know what exactly we would be developing. So looking at virtue, I thought supposed to help us formulate a response. What it has done is sort of give us a baseline for signposting, not going to say teaching, for signposting and beginning to sort of stoke fires in people, kind of whetting their appetite, making them inquirers. So turning ourselves towards the topic of virtue has served us in making us more interested in turning towards virtue. And we now want to turn others towards virtue. But the virtue was supposed to serve a secondary point to help us understand what it is we would be developing in wanting to pitch character development. Right? But we've learned something about teaching, that is how to stimulate A-turn. We've happened upon chorea, we've happened upon sort of relating and a dropping of position, as sort of an entryway into teaching virtue. Maybe that's just me.
Sorry to interrupt. Haven't you answered the sort of question about the character development that you're interested in? Isn't it because it's the nature of the sort of thing in which you want to develop the character to have the sort of self-development that you can't actually bring about any particular, you can't engender a specific character in it, because to do that would be to take away its own capacity to develop itself as the sort of thing that seeks virtue. So you can whet the apple, and that wetting is similar to like wetting a seed, in that you can provide it with the water and the nourishment, but it is something that has to self-develop on its own. And so you sort of found the character that you want to develop. It's just something that is there and can't necessarily be defined in very rigid terms.
Yeah, that's I mean, you can think of character along the terms of creative constraint as well. It's like it's the kind of the place in which something happens. It's like
I also want to pop back, sorry, just to the beginning of Avile's dialogue about how this group started as an intervention, as a sort of identifying a problem and a need. And I want to return to the question of the state that we find ourselves in, the one in which opposition isn't always afforded. And I think pitching this as a sort of, well, I don't know, again, it's not my project. The interventional space, I think there's more to be said and there's more work to be done in developing that. What is it an intervention to, and how is the solution you propose as an intervention going to bring about the state that you're proposing to bring about? I think there's work to be done there, and there's a lot of meat that can be brought out by further.
What you said there, the about the loss of opposition and the intervention is like how did you phrase it now?
Wish I remembered.
I
I think I said that the intervention is necessary in a state where opposition isn't afforded, or where there's a lack of ability to oppose.
Yeah. Okay. So the that the police came in, I think is relevant. And that's just That's a context, at least, that I'm attending to at the moment and interested in. And I think because opposition is afforded there in a sense, and it's perhaps like the nastier forms of opposition. The other element is this the republic thing of warriors, or so just to name that context. I'm not sure what will come of that. So schools, police, and the other thing in mind is faith groups. If within a faith there's the affordance of opposition is lost, the results might be like a deathly or a dying or stagnation of. But we're pushing off now into practicals. Does anyone have anything they want to add? Maybe a concluding gesture. Yeah, we've covered territory. Yeah, but
I'm gonna
yeah,
watch these over and over again. Like I'm realizing how much I probably missed in all these conversations.
I think the last thing, I think we've all taken this as we're given, but I want to state it outright because I'm very interested in the relating.
they're related.
The relating bit. I'm very interested in that. Is it virtue, human virtue, seems to show up in a social matrix. So there's an intricate webbing in which we see virtue. And it's very difficult to sort of capture outside that webbing. But I'm very interested in webbing.
Webbing.
The webbing. There's something about the webbing and sort of the intervention we want to propose, the turning we want to do, is about the webbing, and it is about persons in the webbing. So it's not only a turning here, but a recognition of the webbing. There's a lot happening at the same time.
Like you are also a part of it.
Yeah. I reaffirm that I think the heart of whatever we're doing is what we're doing. It's this activity. That's the thing that we should be pointing to again and again and most. And in a gesture for that continuance, we're going to look to the Parmenides next. You guys keen for that? Dialectic. A lot of nothing somethings.
I think it'll also be useful to re-evaluate, or as a tool to re-evaluate sort of one and manyness and relationship itself, because I think there are topics of that in the Parmenides, and those are the sort of questions that come into being when we start to talk about being and nothingness.
Yeah. Sure. I'm going to click that red button. Your timing.